was freaking impossible to peel that off. It ripped the facer off of the insulation before it would peel off of it. It is incredible how well that stuff sticks. It is amazing.
So did you make a little loop with it and stick to the TV to the wall?
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our regular discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Editorial Director Brian Pontilillo.
Hey, everyone.
Digital Brand Manager Rob Watzak.
Hello.
And producer Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, it's good to see you guys this morning. It is always a highlight of my week to talk to you. It almost seems like we're, around the water cooler by this point. I think you'd agree.
Yeah, it definitely feels like the same conversations we'd be having at work. So I think that's probably part of what's kept my sanity through this whole remote year is I still get to see you guys every week.
Yeah, I went through, I think everyone did, at the beginning of the pandemic, we started doing all this stuff digitally and all these Zoom meetings and everything. At first I had this big resistance to it and another Zoom meeting. And like I heard the same comments from a lot of people, but I realized that I was just being grumpy because, when we were in the office, number one, when we were in the office, we had just as many meetings. And number two, given what we have been going, what we have gone through over the past over a year now, we should be grateful for Zoom and Squadcast and all these platforms that we use to get together and communicate. So I came around.
I think Jeff probably hates it because I think he has a ton more work to do because of the remote and digital environment we're in.
Oh yeah,
is that true, Jeff?
It's a lot different, yeah. Stuff that should be simple is a lot more complicated than it ought to be.
Well, good news, Jeff. We have a new podcast idea for you, but we can talk about that later.
Oh no.
He says, oh no. Rob, you have been very busy and I give you a hard time about stuff sometimes, but you have made a very cool contraption, your pedal tractor. Can you tell folks what the latest upgrade is?
Well, I know we've mentioned it a couple of times and I think I had it kind of mostly working last time, but I guess not. Now it's fully functional. Steers, stops, turn, it moves forward and backwards, and it works surprisingly well and has surprisingly a lot of power.
It has one Rob power, I would say.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing is it only has a lot of power because it's geared down so low. I was able to drive over a giant pile of bags of mulch the other day with it. It's like a monster truck. But
I think, Rob, we got to direct people to that video because, I've heard you talk about it for a bit. I've seen your bike plow before, but when I saw this video, I was blown away. It's really something.
All right. Well, I've got a little clip on YouTube, and I'll embed that in the podcast notes. So
yeah.
Have you figured out how many calories you burn when you're pedaling that thing? Because your legs are flying.
Yeah, you have to pedal kind of fast, but I could pedal slower and just be at a different gear ratio. But then I need more power. It's like the thing's heavy, so it's just like if you're on a mountain bike and you're trying to climb a steep hill, you got to put it in a really low gear and pedal kind of quickly. And but people on some of these bike groups that I'm on Facebook were like, "Oh, you needed some bigger gears on that thing." I'm like, "No, you're missing the point. This thing's a working machine, and I got a very small yard, so."
And I would point out that tractors are kind of slow generally, right? It's not not a Bonneville machine.
Some tractors, lawn tractors and such, have a higher gear for when you want to get it to where you're doing the work. But when you're plowing or whatever, you're not moving fast. So it's not going to be that much slower than if I were using a motorized machine to do what I want to do with it, which is the first project I'm going to do is mount the plow and regrade my terrace. It's my stone dust terrace. So.
So what I find most impressive about this, Rob, is that most folks would build this as a curiosity, right? It's just for fun, but you're actually going to put this thing to work, which I think is
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is that after years of being a carpenter and not taking care of myself and years of being a long distance runner, it's like I can't lift things anymore and I hate shoveling. And so, but I love riding my bike and I don't do that enough. So this is a way to kill two birds with one stone.
Oh man, Jeff, what have you been doing besides uploading podcasts and editing them?
Not a whole lot. I was thinking about it. It's like nothing's on fire, so it's like I haven't gotten motivated to work on anything. It's like there's a lot of stuff that needs to get done, but it's like, all right, well, let's just relax a little bit.
Good for you.
Yeah.
How about you, Brian? What have you been doing?
Well, other than work at Fine Homebuilding and Green Building Advisor, I have been helping with some plans for a house. Early stages of developing some plans with a couple of friends and an architect, and literally starting. I mean, there's a floor plan in mind and sort of ideas for what needs to be in the building, but sort of literally thinking through the construction and literally starting with the foundation. And so this morning I was diving into frost protected shallow foundations in the IRC. And this house is going to be located in climate zone 5 in an area where I was shocked to see how easy it was to put in in that climate zone. How minimal the requirements are for a shallow.
Is it just the edge of the slab you have to insulate?
That's it. And it's like R6. You don't need much insulation. You don't need the wing insulation. You don't need anything under the slab. So now I'm curious, and what I'm going to try to do a little research is to see, like, okay, so that's minimal. That's code minimum. That's what the IRC has decided. We'll make this a stable foundation.
Yeah, I think that's about safety, as in like the house doesn't heave, right? It's not about energy efficiency.
Right. So how far do you need to go for efficiency and comfort, right? Especially because you're even if you put in some flooring, you're essentially going to be standing on a concrete slab in this type of a home. So I'm curious about that balance. Like, obviously if you look at a passive house on a slab, there's ridiculous amounts, 12 inches of or more of, EPS surrounding that slab. But I wonder sort of the, the pretty good house, Mike Main's and Emily and Dan's kind of thinking around performance. Like I'm curious where they kind of fall in terms of.
Have you come up with a number?
I haven't yet. That's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to try to get to today, so that I can, sort of really, Patrick and I were talking about the usefulness of basements recently as, extra space, storage space for mechanicals. There's a lot of things to love about basements, and there's a lot of things to really not like about basements. Water.
It's a pretty expensive hole in the ground.
It's an expensive hole in the ground. You have water intrusion issues on a flat lot. You're likely stuck with having a sump or something, so you're managing water. You're not like passively getting it away from the building. So, I think there's it's sort of like there's just as many pros and cons with basements, and, slabs seem to me to minimize a lot of the sort of expense and riskiness.
Yeah, I can tell you the slab on grade construction of our barn, it's a pole building, but it's, it doesn't have a basement, it doesn't have a crawl space, it's a slab, right? It's fantastic. It really is, but you have to make sure that you raise it above the surrounding grade so it doesn't get swamped, because that is a mistake, especially on outbuildings that people make, right? They don't raise it up enough, and it's the low point.
So what is there a recommendation for height above grade for a slab?
So the guy who knew more than I did about my building made me put it up 12 inches,
Yeah.
And that seems like the right amount to me, in hindsight.
Yeah, I think we had that story on the Energy Smart raft slab a few issues back, and I believe that the builder said the same thing. He said he likes he had a thickened edge, right? He said he likes to have a foot of that thickened edge below grade and a foot of it above grade.
Yeah, and you figure, I mean, you could almost really just, especially if you've got a flat lot, you could almost really just build the whole thing on grade, and then just taper your land up to it, because then you're going to always guarantee to drain away from the house.
So backfill against it, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just make sure you get rid of the organic material, right? Because that's another mistake people make sometimes who are less experienced.
And get to
make sure you're on a good solid base.
Get to a good solid base. Yeah.
So what, do you have a hunch as to what your R value might be under your slab?
R12 is my guess.
That's under the slab?
No.
Slab edge.
The edges. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd be curious to see. I mean, like, most of the projects that I've seen with this type of foundation are taking it to that extreme level. They're going for the passive house certification or that level of energy efficiency. So, I wonder what there's a point of diminishing returns with insulation. We know that. And, but I don't, and I know that pretty well in like a wall, for example, like, in these colder climates, when you start to get over R30, you start to have, your insulation every inch becomes a lot less effective than those first, 10 inches or so. But I don't know what that's, I don't know the equations with
frost protected.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Is like, there's a lot of these details that if you're not interested in high performance homes, you're just not going to do the detail at all. So there probably aren't examples of average performing ones to compare them to. Right.
Yeah. And as long as you're in a case like this, as long as you're hitting the code minimum, you get to decide how much extra you add, the extra is extra. So,
but you can't add it later.
You can add it later, and I don't think you want to be totally arbitrary about it. Like, I think I'll add, 2 more R's.
Yeah.
Like, you'd be a little more scientific than that.
Yeah.
Or you could just leave it off altogether, like those Levittown houses, and grow, tulips in February. That's what that's another way to go.
That is why the bulbs grow sooner on the side of my house than they do out in the yard.
Oh yeah, that's a real thing. So, I think our listeners would agree, when you take on a big home project, there's the very optimistic beginning of it. And then at some point there's the like, why the heck did I just tear my perfectly good building or house apart and do this crazy thing? So I hit my wall on, I guess it was Saturday, when I had to reroute the wiring in order to change the orientation of the barn stairs. And I had to make how many holes, Rob, in my
I don't know.
wall that
It looked
protects
like
the stair opening?
It looked like a chessboard or something.
I've learned when you have to fish wires or reroute wires, you just got to make holes, and you got to be just willing to make a hole big enough to put your hand in to grab wires and pull them. And I did something in this building that I had never done before, and I probably will never do again, is I air sealed all the horizontal electrical cables into the studs, right, with spray foam. So I would put a little splurch around the circumference of the cable. Well, that makes it impossible to pull it back through the holes when you want to reroute it.
Wasn't that an interior wall too?
Yeah. Yes.
And a knee wall. So how big was that wall?
I mean, how long?
It was like 12 feet long.
About 12 feet by 3 foot tall.
So the number of holes that you put in that thing, it's like, I think I would have just ripped those drywall right off and started over.
Well, so boy, I really thought about that, Rob, but then you're into redoing the corner bead at the top, right? Yeah. And I got to go buy drywall at the home center, right? Because I don't have, an inventory. So I just decided to cut holes and then put the pieces back in. And I think it saved time. It definitely saved money.
For sure. Just cut the holes big enough, right?
Yeah, I cut them probably, 8 by 8 or foot by foot, so I could reach 2 holes or two places where the cable passed through the studs from one hole. I cut it in the center of the stud cavity, and then you can reach in either way. So don't tear your house apart, folks. You'll regret it.
So we heard from grumpy.
And then I had to, I patched the back up, and I put mud on it just so I didn't have to look at the horrible situation. It looks better now. I think you'd agree. I heard from Mike Gerton about our appeal for anniversary interviewees. He says, for your next 40th interviewee, I recommend Myron Ferguson. You mentioned him in a recent podcast, and he's a great choice. He's funny, and his background in construction is a lot deeper than drywall. He started out as a builder and moved to drywall. Ask him about his experiences with raising chickens. Lots of stories. And I may have suggested this before, but being old, I forget a lot. I think you should try doing a live podcast recording where you line up a couple of people with questions to be brought in to ask on the show, and then you answer it. It's live in the sense that other people can listen in at the same time. What do you guys think about that? What's he really talking about?
It's like a webinar, basically. I think that's a cool idea. I mean, radio shows and a lot of podcasts have live guests. I think we probably just do it our way out of convenience, right?
No, we do.
It's because we used to go up to the podcast studio, right, and sit around a table. But this model, you can have people from anywhere, right?
For sure.
I think you guys are missing the point about why we don't do it live, and that's because we'd actually have to answer the questions.
Oh yeah, we get to pick the questions this way, right?
So if Mike wants to do it live, he's got to be on the podcast with us. That's where I'm drawing the line.
That seems fair, right? This comes from Andre. Hi, podcast crew. Continuing to enjoy the podcast and the listener commentary. We are a great audience, aren't we? Which is true. After a year in our 30-plus-year-old house in the Pacific Northwest, I can sympathize with Corey's issue of AC only running in the lower floor. I found the original house plans. The builder used a stock plan as the basis for the building plan, and it's apparent that the house was designed for heating and not cooling. A generation ago, the need for cooling was less, and AC equipment was not as commonplace, at least here in the Pacific Northwest. The open plan portion allows for the heat to rise and fill the upper floor. Of course, this happens both summer and winter. The design also has no floor plate allowance for ducting between floors, as I'm sure you've heard. When it comes to ducting, size matters. For the AC to work effectively, the warm air needs to be returned to the air handler. With no return duct in the upper story, it just doesn't work. The air handler has enough jam, but the circulatory ducting volume has to be increased to the upper floor. Well, that's good feedback, Andre. Thank you. He says, I enjoyed Patrick's interview with Peter Pfeiffer and his regional-driven expertise on dealing with heat. He had some insight on not trying to AC entirely with floor registers and return register positioning. Some ducting upgrades are in the future for our house. Linen closet, I'm looking at you. Oh, that's great.
With the recent heat wave out in the Pacific Northwest, one thought I had is because those houses are designed for heating and not cooling, and there's a lot of wood houses and it's a very humid environment, I'm scared for, when people start panicking and installing AC systems out there, what kind of effect it's going to have on the inside of the walls of those houses. Because, these old craftsman houses that aren't air sealed well, all made out of wood, and now you're air cooling them and they're not air sealed well, you're going to get a lot of moisture concerns inside the walls. I feel like
you're worried of condensation on the back side of the drywall.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a real concern.
I just hope that the HVAC people out there are well educated about that sort of concern.
I had to, this is a really long email. You guys are going to have to bear with me, but we got this originally in the Fine Homebuilding editorial mailbox, and it comes from Brent. Brent has some thoughts on good home features and not so good ones. I don't build new homes. I remodel and repair existing homes. I get to know the families and the homes after they've been lived in for years and learn of the design features that end up being very bad. Perhaps architects might want to take out a pad and pen. Number 1, spa tubs. These things may have been nice selling features for luxury homes, but in my 30-plus years of working on houses, I've met only one family who liked theirs. Their kids were under 8 and played in it. That sounds fun. He says laundry room entries from the garage. Nobody, and I mean nobody, enters their house from the front show entrance. They go through the garage, which is barely wide enough to allow car doors to open, much less accommodate bikes, scooters, golf bags, mowers, and still allow people to walk through. Then the laundry, which was laid out on a drafting table, is a major choke point for the endless traffic in and out. He says fireplaces for any home in climates that experience more than a month of sub-freezing weather are useless. In fact, they suck more heat out of the house when burning than they give off. Most of my customers here in PA tell me that they light theirs on Christmas Eve and that's it. I know it's traditional to put in a $15,000 or $20,000 fireplace, but must it be placed in the most important location in the entire house? He doesn't like skylights in bathrooms. The people who build skylights never seem to get the memo that the tunnel must be insulated on all its sides. When the hot, steamy air hits a cold skylight, it condenses and runs down the trim and walls inside the tunnel. Stucco. This is a good product in dry climates, but to work in cold, humid environment, you got to know a lot more than the average stucco guy about how to install it. Unfortunately, production stucco companies only need it to last until the check clears. Pennsylvania leads the nation in terrible stucco, and it's regularly being torn off 3 to 6 year old homes all over our area. I guess I shouldn't complain. My kids got to go to college because of the terrible design features like these. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
I didn't read half of it. It's kind of a rant. I think you'd describe it, right?
You know,
it's kind of a rant, and it's very specific to, like, we've all heard, anyone's been paying attention, I've heard about the stucco failures in Pennsylvania. So stucco's, there's other places where stucco's been done really well, and it's holding up. And the spa tubs, like, there are people who use them and love them, and there are people who put them in for the wrong reasons, and they're a waste. I agree. The skylight thing, of course. Like, right on. Like, skylights in a bathroom lets you do it really well. You put it in a steamy room like that, you're asking for trouble. So, but I think every remodeler would have their list. What's on your list, Rob?
I'll tell you, I think about the garage thing all the time. I totally agree with him. It's like, and the thing is, I like the way he thinks, because it's like, you don't need a fancy building science or design or engineering degree. You just need to pay attention to how people live in their houses and have a little creativity, and just not take things as like a given. But it's like, every house that has an attached garage, people use the garage as the main entrance to the house, and they also use it as a place to dump everything that they use on a regular basis. So it's like, unless you're like a special guest, you have to look at everybody's crap and trip over it when you go into their house. And so it's like when we've designed
that's why you don't have a garage.
Yeah, that's the only reason I don't have a garage. No, but if I had a garage, I would have, well, first of all, I'd probably have a carport, or if I had a garage, I would have a separate utility room off of it, or built-in cabinets, or something that would make it a little bit of a nicer place. But so also, like, he talks about the entrance being a little bit more comfortable and better stairs, and I think it would probably make a lot of sense to have all of that, like, junk space adjacent to that path that you take into the house, but not actually in the path. So I like how he thinks.
Seems like a practical guy. This comes from Hammer. Hi, hope all is well. I started building basement walls on top of a slab and have been drilling and tapconning my bottom plates in with an 18-volt cordless drill. Needless to say, it's taking forever and I need more power. I keep burning and recharging batteries for every 2 holes. I don't need to go through like butter, but at least make some progress within a few minutes. They have cheap corded 7-amp hammer drills at the box store for $60. Would that be strong enough, or do I need more power? Also, I'm going to be attaching 1x4 furring strips over 2-inch foam. What is the minimum Tapcon size I need? I think the box store has 3¼ inch. Is that deep enough? Wow. So this is a really easy answer, Hammer. You need a hammer drill. Totally. If you're trying to drill concrete with a normal drill, it just does not work at all. Have you guys ever tried that?
Yeah, you'll just destroy the drill over it. You'll just wear the drill out faster too. I mean, you definitely want a dedicated tool for this kind of job.
Oh, you're going to love it.
Absolutely.
Even if you have to rent one, go to your box store, and they probably rent one. If you're not, so you can don't kill a $60 one. You can probably pay less than $60, rent one for the day or two or the weekend. Yeah. And so
I'm not a big fan of Harbor Freight, but I've heard from a couple people that their hammer drills and rotary hammers And if you want to go for something with more power and it's going to be a little more fun, and it's also going to have a chipping function if you want to pull up tile or do other stuff with it, is an SDS Plus rotary hammer, which is a slightly bigger hammer drill. You know, you can probably drill up to 3/4 or 7/8 inch holes with it. Maybe a little bigger if you use a core bit, which is kind of like a hole saw for concrete and masonry. But that's an even better thing because it's got a lot more impact power, and it drills much more quickly.
Yeah. You know, a comment on the Tapcons. The older and harder the concrete is, the more challenging it is to use Tapcons in that kind of an application, because they need the concrete to be completely intact in order for it to work, but they need it to be also soft enough for the threads to grip, and you'll just keep snapping those things off. And the longer they are,
or strip the holes, right? We've all had that happen. They're really easy to strip out.
Yeah, so I mean, like, you know, there's a bunch of other options. I mean, one of the simplest options is those plastic masonry fasteners. And I was looking at Home Depot. They've got them this plastic grip brand. It's like 4.5 inches long, and it almost looks like those plastic plugs that you put vinyl shutters in your house with. They're kind of threaded, but the threads aren't for screwing them in. They just kind of grip as you shove the thing into the hole, and
I've always called those nylon anchors, and maybe that's a misnomer, but it's, what is it, Rob? It's like, it looks like a pen cap almost, and you put it in the hole, and then you put a screw in it.
Yeah, it's like, it's got like a big flat washer on the end, and then a shaft with sort of like knurled or threaded edge at the part where it goes into the hole, and you just smack them in there. I mean, I think a lot of insulation contractors who do rigid foam on the outside of foundations use those things at least to hold, or in conjunction with an adhesive. You know, you could use those to sort of hold everything in place until an adhesive sets.
I really like drive anchors, which is kind of looks like a rivet with a nail in it, and you drill the hole, you put this thing in it, and you drive the nail home with a hammer, and boy, they seem to hold pretty good in just about anything that's masonry or concrete. I hate Tapcons personally. I've had very mixed success with those things.
They're fine in really green concrete. If the concrete is very new and it's soft, drilling's easy and they grip nice. But anything that's old, that's likely to chip or just have a hard time getting through, it's tough.
What do you think about Tapcons, Jeff?
I kind of have the same experience where they just shear off most of the time.
Strip out. Don't get me started. This comes from Alex S. While I recognize that both an airtight envelope and more than ample insulation work together in concert to create a high-performance build, but if you were to put more weight on either component, how would you rate it? Wow, this is a good philosophical question. It's the insulation versus air sealing debate, which is something we never do on the podcast.
Oh, come on. It's a simple answer.
Go for it.
Air sealing.
Air sealing.
Yeah. I mean, really, even most installations don't work well without air sealing. And plus, air sealing also is going to make your air environment, your indoor air a healthier environment. But that's just the easiest, most cost-effective, and first thing that you should focus on. At least that's
what do you want to say about it, Brian?
Well, I mean, Rob, of course, I agree. I don't think there's any question. Air sealing is the most important, and there's like almost endless reasons. Although my list will be short, but like Rob said, like if you have air flowing, if you have air flowing through the assembly, your insulation's not helping at all. First of all, and second of all, like Rob said, air sealing doesn't give you good indoor air quality, but air sealing allows you to use appliances like HRVs and ERVs, or just a ventilation strategy that allows you to control and keep indoor air quality healthy. If you just have air coming in and leaving and you don't know how that's happening, then you can't do that. Also, it's a building durability thing. Most we get all hung up on vapor control, but most condensation issues inside assemblies are not from vapor drive, they're from air leaks. And air depositing moisture condensation inside the assembly. So it's about building durability. And finally, it allows other things to work well. And the best example of that is your roof venting. Your roof venting is relying on the stack effect, but if you have a really leaky ceiling below your vented attic, that stack effect is going to be pulling air from the house, not from the soffits. So there's so many things that rely on an airtight house, and it's like, houses need to breathe, yes, and we should decide how they're going to breathe. And the way we do that is to make them airtight and then use proper appliances, bath fans, hood fans, HRVs, ERVs, makeup air to control the air that's flowing in and out of the house. And we can be very specific about it. So no question. In fact, just yesterday, there was an article on Green Building Advisor that you can check out. And Randy Williams, who's a really excellent smart energy rater and builder in a cold climate. And he wrote about a project that he worked on that was basically a code minimum house, just built to code levels in all ways. And he just took some extra steps mostly around air sealing. And it's an excellent article because it shows not only the great thing about that article is it shows how simple it can be. But certainly don't do anything extra with insulation until you've got an air sealing strategy, and you learn about the red pen test, use it, and air seal your buildings.
I love that article. It is indeed really useful for folks who are wanting to understand how to make a better performing house. I always it may be an imperfect analogy, but when people ask me this, I say all right, imagine you want to keep a balloon inflated, right? Do you tie the end of it or do you put fluffy stuff on top of it? It seems like that explains it, right? The fluffy stuff without the balloon being tied doesn't do anything.
Right. Yeah, or wearing a sweater on a cold, breezy day. If there's no breeze, sweater's going to keep you warm. But if there's a breeze, it's not going to do anything. You need a shell.
Well, and not only that, it's like almost everything else you want to do for comfort and durability in a house, expanding on what you were saying earlier, Brian, can't be accomplished, or you could cause even more serious problems if you don't have an airtight house. I know from experience, and I knew this going into it, that when I put my mini splits in my house, that I was going to have to really start paying attention to moisture in the house. And, I've got parts of my house that smell a little mustier than others because I don't have a whole house, duct system. So I have to be really careful and sort of continue to look for opportunities to better the air sealing in my house to try to minimize the negative effects of having this air conditioning system in a leaky old house,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, our Excellence in Air Sealing Award winner, do you have any thoughts on the importance of air tightness?
I got to say that, since I have focused on it, my house is more comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this comes from Dallas. This podcast emailer asked not to be identified, and I can't say I blame him because I wouldn't want anyone to know I listen to this goofy show either, but let's call him Tex. So Tex from Dallas writes, "Hey y'all, quick question regarding windows. You have addressed this in multiple podcasts, but pulling it all together might be helpful to me and others. I'm in the process of building a single-story, 3,800 square foot under roof with 2,700 square foot of living space in Dallas, Texas. It's muggy. Using moderate materials as far as zip and foam as appropriate, want a conditioned attic. My question is on windows. It first relates to what kind of material, vinyl, aluminum, fiberglass. Can I get a quick, high-level pro-con list on these? This may be a basic question, but it can get confusing for someone that doesn't live and breathe windows. Another consideration, I haven't opened a window in 15 years, except for the one time I smoked out the kitchen. I want to go with mostly picture/fixed frame when possible. Any thoughts on this? If opening or egress isn't an issue, I don't see why not." I can confirm for you, if there is any doubt from the group, nobody opens windows in Texas. Thanks a bunch. Love the podcast. Name withheld by request. Wow. So Tex,
Great question.
Tex,
Yeah.
Tex thinks this is a simple question, but I don't think it is. But let's go.
Well, let's first. I think first let's tackle the fixed window debate or fixed.
I think
fixed
that's an
window
easier question, right?
Yeah, because it's the easy one, I think, and it really is a like he said, if it's not like a room that requires egress, then I think it really is a personal choice. And if you know that you don't open your windows, hell yeah, go with fixed windows. They're going to be more efficient. They're going to be more comfortable to be around, and they're going to cost you less money.
So much less money. It's often a third of the price, right?
Yeah, no question. That and I back to the house that I was talking about at the beginning of the show. It's one of the thoughts for saving money on the window package is where are the operable windows and which ones can be fixed. So I think that's definitely always worth thinking about. And maybe the three of you have more thoughts on the material. I really, I guess aesthetics, looks come into play. Because some people are going to say they want a wood window just because they want that look of wood, the character of wood. And other people might have a reason they might not like a material. Maybe someone doesn't like vinyl because it's a tough material when it comes to manufacturing and it's sort of environmental impact. Although most high performance builders and green builders these days are using vinyl windows because most of the European triple pane windows are vinyl windows. So there's a trade-off there. I think that maybe the important thing to note about windows and how it relates to materials is that when it comes to efficiency, it's not so much about the material as it is the whole window levels of performance. So, aluminum, for example, is a lot more conductive than other materials, but that doesn't matter if you get an aluminum window with a whole window, U factor that's lower than a wood window. So it's true that aluminum is more conductive, but you got to look at that whole window performance numbers to really decide which one is better from a performance level. Because one might just have, it might have better technology in the glazing spacers, or it might have a better insulated frame. So the materials are less important in that way. In terms of like durability, I don't know. That's where I kind of don't really have a comment about like the durability of one material over the other. Maybe painting and maintenance you could consider. You have to paint wood, but you don't have to necessarily paint some of the others.
Yeah, I was going to say that look to what's regionally appropriate, right? Like different parts of the country use different materials because they hold up better with the weather, the local weather. So I would say look to what other folks are doing in Texas to decide what material. And I would say in your climate, Tex, that windows with a low solar heat gain coefficient is going to be really important because Texas is freaking hot.
Yeah.
There's other materials. I mean, like he didn't mention wood. You mentioned wood, Brian, and some are hybrids too. Like a lot of the window companies have sort of like the fiberglass on the outside or the aluminum on the outside and the wood on the inside, which is a nice compromise if you're looking for aesthetics and you like the touch of or the look of wood on the inside and the durability on the outside. As far as the materials go, I mean, aluminum and vinyl both expand and contract a lot with temperature where the fiberglass doesn't. So, I mean, that's one thing that fiberglass has going for it over the other two, because you've got your glass and your window frame material that are closer to the same sort of expansion rate, which over time could put stress on seals between the panes and the actual frame material. There's also another material we didn't mention. It's we featured a while ago that Rheem makes stainless steel windows. They're out of Texas too, and
those sound inexpensive.
Yeah, they're custom. They're certainly custom windows, but they're designed in a way where there's a thermal break inside the frame. So even though you've got this conductive material, you're not compromising on energy efficiency like you think you are. And so that's another thing to look at too, is the cross-sectional construction of the windows, because some aluminum window manufacturers, as long as it's not a solid piece of aluminum going from the inside to the outside, if they have put thermal breaks in the actual frame of the window, that's less of a concern. So I
think that's almost a given, Rob. I really do. With an aluminum window, it needs a thermal break. It's a terrible material because of its conductivity. If you don't do that in there, put that in there.
For sure. I mean, there's a reason why they make heat sinks out of aluminum,
and wire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's also the composites, right, or engineered stuff. And I'm not actually sure if Marvin's the only manufacturer that does that, but they have that. Is it Ultrex or?
Yeah, so that's actually kind of falls sort of into that fiberglass category. It's an extruded fiberglass, glass reinforced product. So it's basically a fiberglass material. It kind of, people call that fiberglass, but it's basically a resin. It's a glass impregnated resin that's extruded into the frame's shapes. So
how do you know so much about this?
I actually got a Marvin window tour, a factory tour once. It was actually really fascinating. Yeah. But
so I guess that paid for itself for Marvin's sake, right?
Yeah. Well, this wasn't even when I was working for Fine Homebuilding. I was actually working for an architect at the time, and they basically want people to be educated about their products. So, but yeah, I mean the fiberglass. Personally, I think that's one of the nicest materials because it's just really, the color goes all the way through. You never need to worry about refinishing. It's really resilient structure, strength. It's really strong stuff. But you gotta balance costs. You gotta balance aesthetics.
Your point about the color, Rob, brought to mind like one of the best bargains in mainstream windows is if you get a wood window, get the interior pre-finished, because it is surprisingly inexpensive and it saves so much labor and probably cost versus having a painter or yourself painting them. It is such a bargain.
And it's probably going to look nicer and last longer too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a great thing.
You're so right about that. And I made that mistake the last remodel putting in. I used the Anderson 400 series, and they were which were a great window for the money, I thought.
I agree.
They were vinyl clad on the outside and wood on the inside, and I just thought I was saving a little bit of money by getting the wood, getting them unfinished on the inside. And I painted them myself, and I really was
regretting it.
Kicking myself the whole way.
Oh my God. And painting windows is one of the most tedious jobs. It's one of the few things I hate about working on my house, especially if you've got an old wood window with lots of panes. It's a pain.
3 windows in, I give up on keeping the paint off the glass, and I just resign myself to coming back with a razor.
Yeah. I just go right there. I don't even ask. Michelle's like, "What the heck are you doing?" I come back with a razor. It's fine.
It's such a big topic, so we haven't even talked about operation. We've just talked about glass and materials and cladding or not. So I love casement windows. Folks in New England generally do not, but I like casements because when the wind's blowing, they seal better. I like the uninterrupted view out of a casement window versus the sashes and a double hung have a meeting rail that cuts right across your the landscape.
Or even an awning window, because then you've got a little bit of weather protection too, where it tilts up instead of to the side. You can just like your window on your car on a hot day, you can leave it cracked without worrying about the rain coming in.
Have you guys ever lived with casement windows? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I prefer them over double. I mean, double hungs fit the style of my house better because it's an old house, but I prefer a casement window for function and visibility.
Someone has I think it's Anderson. I'm not sure, but someone has a really nice casement that looks like a double hung from the outside.
So Marvin definitely does that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as you might imagine, they're super inexpensive, not
So it just basically has a divider and the top's fixed and the bottom's a casement.
Yeah, and
Well, at least the
no.
one I'm thinking of has the applied muttons on it to make it look like a double hung.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. And again, I wish I could remember whose brand it was that I saw. I remember seeing it at a show, and I was really impressed by how good it looked from the exterior. They gave it dimensions, and it looks really good.
I would say it's definitely not a thing to cheap out on. Spend as much as you can on windows, because dealing with crappy windows will affect you for the entire time you live in the house. It's just
and they
not
won't
worth
last.
it. It's not worth it.
My house has cheap, I think I don't know what brand it is, but it's like one of the first vinyl replacement windows. Someone threw out all the old wood windows in my house and put those things in. Every single one of them, latches are broken on them. They just don't seal anymore, and they're all fogged up.
I agree, but I also think there's a sweet spot. I think there's a like we were talking about diminishing returns with insulation. Don't cheap out on windows, but you don't have to buy
agreed
windows. Find that sweet spot where you're getting something that is good, is quality. I mean, hey, if you want to spend more, go for it, but I don't think you have to go to the top of the line.
I can tell you it's one thing that your builder or remodeler will have very strong opinions on, and it is based almost entirely on their experience with problems. And listen to them too.
Yeah. And before you buy high performance windows, air seal.
Right.
Your money's going to go a lot further with air sealing than it is with windows.
Oh man.
So, and you could do what I did too. You could keep your eye out on Facebook Marketplace and buy the $40 window that someone bought 20 years ago and never installed, instead of the $700 brand new window for my kitchen.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of misordered stuff for sale.
Check your local builders. Plan your remodels based on the scratch and dent pile or the return pile at your local builders. Really? Yeah.
All my barn windows came from the dunnage bin at the lumber yard. They advertised in the local paper that they were clearing out this misordered leftover stuff. And I swear I got these 4-foot by 4-foot slider windows that are Anderson. They are very expensive. And I want to say it was like $800 for the 4 windows. It was stupidly cheap. And It was so fantastic. And then when I added windows at the beginning of the outbreak, those came from Lowe's, and they were misordered too. And I think I got 4 windows for like $180 or something. It's just amazing how cheap they are when they're trying to get rid of them. So this comes from Jim. Hi, FHB crew. I'm renovating my house, which includes a partial cathedral ceiling. Page 6 of the attached document has the pertinent drawings. The 2x8 rafters are new additions prescribed by the engineer. My plan is mostly in place, but I continue to question with some implementation details. It is hard to have confidence in any cathedral ceiling plan after reading the comments from Martin Holliday. I often feel like he's reaching through my computer screen, shaking me and yelling, "What the hell are you doing, man?" My house is a 1959 ranch with 8-foot ceilings and a 512 roof pitch. The lack of elevation doesn't leave me with many options for insulating the slope part of the ceiling, even with closed cell foam. Even without closed cell foam, it only provides a questionable amount of insulation. So I'm going to try really hard to explain what this person is doing. So they had a flat ceiling in their ranch house. They're removing the ceiling joists, and at their engineer's behest, they're adding 2x8 rafters and putting, what are they called, rafter ties or collar ties? We really need Matt Milham to help us get the nomenclature right, because I always get those things mixed up. But anyway, he's raising the ceiling, and so the ceiling will have sloped sections and a flat section in the center. Does that seem like a good explanation?
We're kind of looking at what the typical upstairs detail in a cape, where you have a mini attic above the collar ties, but then you have like half the roof is the sloped portion of the roof.
And it's only 512, so it's a little triangle up there, relatively speaking. But his question mainly deals with the sloping part of the ceiling, because as he points out, with 2x8s, there's not enough depth for fluffy insulation, and he's asking about how to do this. Okay. All right, we're only partially through this. I'm planning to use site-built vent baffles made with rigid foam, which is essentially a cut and cobble exercise. I'm open to paying the money for spray foam insulation, but it is a little hard to justify when I consider that the baffles may represent the majority of the cut and cobble work. This assumes that I can't use 3 inches of foam board for the baffles, which would fill the remainder of the 2x6 rafter bays after the vent channel. After the 2x6 bays are filled, the rest of the cut and cobble exercise should be comparatively easy since it involves bigger sheets and regular shapes that require little notching and trimming. As a reference point, if I were to use spray foam, I would bond fig on the 2x6 rafters and spray the bays full to the level of the furring strips. Okay. So he wants to know if he should spray foam and then bond fig the rafters. We haven't even gotten to the question.
Yeah.
Should I read the questions, or do you guys want to talk about this before we get there? Let me do that. This leads me to a few questions. Would you recommend spray foam for any or all of the cathedral ceiling? I know the eaves can be difficult to seal, but do you think spray foam is the prudent choice? If I conclude that spray foam is required for the eaves, I'll probably spray the rafter bays as well, although I would still plan to do the vent baffles myself. I'm going to spray the rafter bays. What thickness of foam would you recommend for the baffles? Thicker board would reduce spray foam costs, but I suspect it will also be harder to work with. I've been trying to locate a state-of-the-art process for cut and cobble, although I'm not finding much beyond fitting rigid foam pieces loosely and filling the gaps with spray foam. You guys have stated multiple times in the podcast that spray foam in the gaps is a flawed practice since it eventually cracks. My inability to find recent online recommendations / discussions combined with your statements about known issues and with standard building methods is definitely concerning to me. Okay. All right. So
first, maybe I missed this, but did he say where he's located?
Yeah, he's in New Hampshire. No,
Okay.
He's in Minnesota. He's in Minnesota. Yeah, he's west of Minneapolis, I believe.
So I think we'd have to know the exact climate zone, but I think
I did put that at the bottom of this. So he's in Plymouth, Minnesota, 15 miles west of Minneapolis, Zix, zone 6.
So our
it's
49,
cold.
Our 49 is code minimum for a ceiling, right? For a roof in his area.
Isn't it less though for a sloped ceiling still? I think it is.
It might be, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot. He mentioned a lot. I'm a little bit confused. So why don't we start with some of the basics? He's got 2 options. First of all, in terms of choosing to vent or not vent his roof, right?
I think we probably all agree that not venting is fine, right?
Not venting is fine for 2 reasons. Number one, venting doesn't work great in lower sloped roofs, and he's got a 5 pitch, so he's on the lower sloped end, and it's less. The lower that you're sloped, the less effective your roof venting gets. So therefore, he probably doesn't want to vent it. If you don't vent your roof, you have two possibilities. You either need to include some air impermeable insulation either above or below the sheathing, or you need to have a vapor diffusion port. Vapor diffusion ports are less effective in cold climates than they are in
I don't think it's even allowed in this climate. I don't think
I think you're right about that. I think they're only for warmer climates. So now we've narrowed it down to having to have some sort of air impermeable insulation either above or below the roof deck. If he's not going to re-roof and put insulation, put rigid foam above the roof deck, then, cut and cobble in this situation has, and I think this is mostly anecdotal, but if he's reading Martin Holliday, he probably knows that it's been known to be problematic in these types of ceilings.
Yeah.
And I think it has a lot to do with movement and gaps and cracks getting in there and air getting to the cold sheathing and condensation happening. And so cut and cobble is
problematic.
Again, it's anecdotal, but it's known to be a bit risky.
There's a good case to be made to put foam on the top side of the roof, right? Like, this is an easy roof. It's pretty low slope. Nobody ever wants to hear this because you have to resolve the detail at the eaves and the overhangs, right? But Wouldn't that be a better roof? It solves the thermal bridging.
It would if he's up for re-roofing, and if he's going to do it himself, or if he can find a contractor that will do it. And what I've heard so much is that when people want to do this, they either can't find a contractor willing to do it because they haven't done it before, or the bids that they get are outrageous. So I think that's it's the details. Yeah, you have to figure them out, but I mean, I've seen them figure it out in some pretty simple ways. So I don't think they're overwhelmingly challenging, but either he's going to have to do it or find someone willing to do it.
And if you can't or don't want to do that, I think spray foaming it is definitely the way to go. I try to never tell people to use spray foam because it's got some nasty side effects of global warming potential, generally speaking. But, sometimes it's the only option. Yeah,
it's a problem solver in certain cases. He doesn't necessarily, he can choose lower GWP spray foam. There are some options, and with closed cell, it's got to be closed cell against the roof deck. It can't be open cell. And he does have the option to, especially if he's going to fur down the rafters a little bit, he does have the option to do a flash and fill system. He doesn't have to fill the whole. I
think to get his necessary R value, it's going to require foam. I really do. So in that climate, you got 7 inches, right? And what is spray foam is roughly R4 or R5 per inch. Even that is not really enough, but you're going to have to talk to your building inspector to see what they're going to make you do. Oftentimes they're more accepting of existing structures with regard to insulation levels. And boy, I can tell you it's going to be, no matter what you do, better than what it is. Wouldn't you guys agree?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, getting up there, but yeah, certainly getting up there, even if cut and cobble was a safe route, it's just on that big, huge cathedral ceiling, that's going to be a bear of a project. And like you said, we don't necessarily recommend spray foam as the first option, but in some cases, it's just probably the best option. This is one of them.
There are more questions here. So with regard to cut and cobble, my barn is entirely cut and cobbled is how I insulated it. It's because I bought a bunch of recycled polyiso, and they sent me so much of it, more than I had ordered, that I put it everywhere. So I can tell you that if you don't have a large enough gap to spray foam around the perimeter of your cut and cobbled cavity, I found the sweet spot is 3/8 of an inch. If you go smaller than that, it will crack. But if you go 3/8 of an inch with a good can spray foam, I like the Perfill. It seems to work fine. Admittedly, my barn is a little light on framing, so that might have something to do with why it's performed here. I've recently opened walls and I look at this to see if the spray foamed gaps are well sealed, and it looks like they continue to be.
And you can also do some belt and suspenders air sealing, right? You can do some airtight drywall, or you can tape seams for sure in a cut and cobble situation. You can do some airtight drywall or a membrane, so you can do a secondary air barrier for insurance.
Yeah, in fact, that's one thing I was going to ask is, have you guys seen anybody on GBA particularly documenting sort of a cut and cobble where they foam and then tape the seams or anything similar to that? Because it seems like, an air sealing tape would probably not be a bad choice on like the outer layer of a cut and cobble system.
I was surprised at how well. So interestingly, is when I was building this building, Fine Homebuilding tested a bunch of air sealing tapes. So on the free table was a bunch of tape that I brought home, right? And when I went to hang the TV behind me, I got to see how it was doing and how it was sticking to the fiberglass facer on the insulation. And it was freaking impossible to peel that off. It ripped the facer off of the insulation before it would peel off of it. It is incredible how well that stuff sticks. It is amazing.
So did you make a little loop with it and stick to the TV to the wall?
Oh, that's funny.
So we keep saying cut and cobble. I mean, if for people who haven't been following the podcast for a long time, we're going to explain what that is and who coined that term. I know Martin was the first person I ever heard who used it, but
Geez, I don't know. I think it might have been him.
but because that's what I did in my attic. You saw that, Patrick. That I
So
did.
to answer Rob's question, it's when you take sheets of insulation and you cut it into small pieces to fill it in cavities, and it's not ideal because you still have the thermal bridging of the framing members typically, right? You're putting it in the cavities in place of a fluffy type insulation.
Yeah, and you're figuring out a way with either a sealant or a spray foam in a can, something, or tape, as we mentioned, to basically air seal lots of little pieces of foam to your framing so that you don't get condensation and air moving up to your sheathing.
I wonder if you had if you could get the rigid insulation to plane out with the rafters. I wonder if you could just kind of bridge the rafters with tape. So tape the two sheets in adjacent bays and bridge the rafters and air seal it that way.
Oh, you totally could. It would be expensive though, because like those tapes are, what, $1 a foot? Is that a fair price point?
They're pretty expensive, yeah.
And wouldn't the drywall do that job if the drywall is right on the underside of the rafters? I mean, like you said earlier.
If you know what you're doing and making sure that the drywall is airtight, which that is part of a system, right? That has to, if you know what to look for, because you got wall plates and whatnot, the drywall's got to going to connect to the walls, and that's
no can lights.
That airtight system, no can lights,
no can lights,
need ceilings, no.
And when, like Patrick, when you're talking about airtight drywall in a situation like this, you've got 4 other edges of adjacent walls, of the ridge, of the top plate of the wall beneath it, that you've got to make sure that you're not air is not coming up into that space between the drywall and the foam from those things too. So it's not just the drywall itself. You're going to want to be air sealing at every transition if you're relying on the drywall to insulate that ceiling.
Yeah, good point, Rob. Well, I'm sure that was completely unhelpful. You guys, I don't know if you were on the show, but you may remember I appealed to our listeners for help with a high-tech HVAC story I've been working on, and I wanted to thank the people who reached out. I made some new friends, and we're going to hopefully hear more from those folks who helped me in later podcasts. Did you guys see the weird little video I put in the AdSets folder of someone's outdoor heat pump unit?
No.
Well, anyway, so I asked one of the folks that answered my call for help to take pictures of his indoor and outdoor units. So if we need to, we can show what one of these things looks like in an installed setting for the magazine piece, right? And so he did that, and he sent me this video, and it demonstrates really effectively why I think this technology is so awesome, because he takes his video and his heat pump happens to go from its third of 5 speeds to the second one. And how much quieter it is when it switches down is amazing to me, because if you've ever been around an outdoor unit for a heat pump or air conditioner, they can be really freaking loud, and it's not something you want to sit next to out in the patio, or it's not something you want below your bedroom window because they're loud. And so if you all are interested in what I'm talking about, we'll put that video on the podcast page, and it's not long. And I also wanted to thank Eric for doing that, and I also wanted to let his wife Jenny know, if she's listening, that if we ever need to go to Eric into cleaning up the utility room, just send an email to the FHB podcast mailbox, and we'll embarrass him on the show and get him, or we'll have him take pictures or something or whatever. The condensate pump jumps to mind as something we could have him take pictures of. So, Jenny, if you need Eric to clean up his act, let us know and we'll help you out.
So, Patrick, on that thought of the sound, when I got my the mini splits, because I got 30,000 BTU Mitsubishi unit on the outside of my house. On the north side of my house, which my house is only like 5 feet from the property line. So this thing is like right next to my neighbor's driveway, 15, 20 feet from their back porch, where I didn't know whether they'd be sitting out there, hanging out. So I was a little nervous about putting this thing out there. but you can stand in their driveway 10 feet away and barely hear that thing. It's like quieter than the like tabletop fan that we put in the guest room in our house.
I'm going to stop you there though, Rob, because we've talked about mini splits so much, like you have, right? These variable capacity Asian heat pumps that work really well. People know about these. So what I'm talking more about are like replacements for central AC and heat pumps that people just don't know about. And I've had a difficulty learning about them myself, despite knowing who to call. And it's so we're digging into this for folks, and I hope that they learn something, because I think there's a lot of advantages to it. And honestly, it's not that much more expensive than the like 1 and 2 stage stuff we were all familiar with. But it's cool stuff, and all the companies make it now virtually. I found, so there's these goofy websites like HVAC Direct, right? And I don't know how they do it, but they'll sell like heating and cooling equipment to anybody. I don't know how they can do that because of the liability, but you can buy that stuff there now. You can buy variable capacity, variable speed, drop-in central equipment. And like the system I looked at that would be for my house was like, I don't know, $5,500, which is not terrible, I would say.
And it's basically the technology from those mini splits just migrating to the full-blown, full-size units. Yeah. And it's funny how like there's these things that just don't filter out into the general knowledge, even though they've been around for a while.
You guys have anything to add before we go?
I think we've said enough.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Jeff, Brian, and Rob for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions, comments, and suggestions, and cleanup requests to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us no matter how you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Take care. Keep craft alive. Happy building.